So Sammy Sosa has apologized for mistakes he made when he was with the Cubs. Was it a mistake for the Sox to trade him away all those years ago? Let's discuss next on a special live Friday night edition of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode, subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show at wherever you get your podcasts. Well, one of the reasons the White Sox traded Sammy Sosa to the Cubs in 1992 is so White Sox, and there's so many parallels you can draw that applies to today's team that I want to discuss in the first segment. Then shouldn't the focus of a team be on winning and being interesting on the field? Let's discuss how we've become obsessed with the margins of baseball and how the business of baseball has become winning on the margins. And finally, Top 5 Friday. Let's go with some of the biggest what-ifs in Sox recent history. And you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. One of the reasons I'm going live right now, actually, is I've tried to record this episode a few times, had some technical difficulties, and I'm just like, you know what? It's Friday night. Screw it. I'm just going to go live, chat with you. Feel free to obviously leave some comments. And one of the reasons why I'm focusing on Sammy Sosa is just because it got me thinking once he made the announcement of his apology. And I don't want to get too much into Cubs business because, this is a Sox show. Although I don't know why Cubs owner Tom Ricketts wanted Sammy Sosa to apologize when Tom didn't own the team when Sammy was, as he was referring it to, making his mistakes, where we can all get on our jump to the conclusions, Matt, and realize he was maybe he's apologizing for using performance-enhancing drugs. Anyways, I just don't want to get too much into Cubs business, but when I saw him in the news, it first got me thinking, man, the most boss move Jerry Reinsdorf could make with his obsession of being little brother to the Cubs and a lot of his self-inflicted wounds, like, trading Sammy Sosa to the Cubs is one of the reasons why the Cubs have come to dominate the Chicago market over the White Sox. But it was one of the boss moves he could have made is bringing Sammy Sosa back to Chicago and embracing him. That would have been just a total boss move for him to do. And also you got to remember, Sammy came to Chicago via the Sox first. I mean, ESPN may have wanted you to forget in the 30 for 30 documentary, Long Gone Summer, but Sammy did play on the South Side. He debuted on the South Side at the end of the 1989 season and then played through 1991. And, it got me thinking the second thing that I was thinking about when Sammy, issued his apology for making mistakes, what those mistakes specifically are, he didn't elaborate on, but was it a mistake for the Sox to trade him? Because if they don't trade him, maybe he still turns out to be an icon. Maybe 1998 still happens, but it's on the South Side. Because who knows when Sammy started to make his mistakes. However, I can't really go there. Because Sammy was getting traded based on two reasons. The first reason, logical, makes sense. They traded him for George Bell, who just came off an all-star season. The second reason is so White Sox that I'm going to tackle in a second. And it also relates to how, we can see the parallels. That was the third thing. I'm like, man, there are a lot of parallels going on. When you think back to 1992, when they traded yes, he was inconsistent with the Sox. Yes, he was maddening with how much he struck out. But there was still a lot of talent there. There was a 5-tool player that the Sox gave up on. And one of the reasons why they gave up on him is so White Sox. And it's also, again, we keep seeing more and more good players get just traded away because, the team doesn't want to pay them. Or we're not being patient. The organization maybe not get patient with them. But trading Sammy Sosa was not a mistake. The logic behind it was flawed, though. And, that flawed logic is one reason why the Cubs became much bigger in the long run in Chicago and even in the baseball landscape than the White Sox. And whether you agree with, whether you back Sammy or not, he was a star in the 90s when we were all kind of hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil when it came to the PEDs. Or a lot of people are like, man, let's just hit the ball deep. Who cares? I remember that kind of, belief. Go back to the, I know his comedy's controversial, but go back to Daniel Tosh's stand-up where he's like, let's hit the ball deep, because baseball did get a little boring. But again, the non-flawed logic was you got an all-star back in George Bell. He was having an all-star season with the Cubs. He hits 25 dingers in 1992. So that's the one reason why it's not a mistake. And you got to give up something good to get something back. That's good. So that happens. But the one reason why the trade in 1992 was flawed was they basically picked hitting coach Walt Henrich, who was fired 3 years later, over Sammy. Frank Thomas said a few years ago, back when that Sammy not being able to work with Henrich was behind why the Sox traded him to the North Side. I think he said it on a post-game show. But this was the quote. Quote, he could have had a great ride on the South Side. Him and Walt Henrich didn't get along. That's why they had to trade him. He wouldn't work with Walt anymore. He did not want to change his swing, and he did not like the finish. So he wanted to be a two-handed guy, and he didn't fit in, end quote. And I'm not saying like the Sox should have fired Walt Henrich over a dispute with a young player who was still, a 5-tool player, was an immensely talented player. But it just goes to show you that the White Sox basically kicked Sammy Sosa out of the building because they preferred Walt Henrich, a hitting coach who, yes, he had success. Frank Thomas thrived under him. I remember when Frank was struggling, I want to say it was the 97 season when he started to have those, the personal issues with his wife, all that, when his numbers declined, he did bring in Walt Henrich to basically be his own personal batting coach after the team fired him. But Henrich was very stubborn. And I do remember this, even though I was like 10 or 11 years old, I do remember Henrich was very stubborn. He wanted hitters to hit a very specific way, his way. He wasn't willing to adapt. And the only other reason why it might have made sense to maybe say, you know what, let's still maybe not listen to Walt, or, hey, Walt, you're a coach. You should be adapting to whatever makes a player better. And also you had Gene Lamont, who had just become the manager. Maybe let Gene have his own hitting coach, which again, another parallel. Does that sound familiar? Got a new manager, but he's got to keep the old hitting coach because of the contract. But that's one of the reasons why the Sox traded him, was because they preferred the hitting coach to the 5-tool player who would then in 1993 go on to have a 30 season. And George Bell was basically cooked. Had a knee injury, clashed with Lamont, and he was out of baseball the next year. But also, who knows if Sammy even stays on the South Side? Because he did have a 30-30 season, and that probably would have driven up his price. So when he eventually made it to free agency, who knows if Jerry's going to pay him? He was already paying Frank Thomas. I believe he signed him to a huge extension, I remember. So, who knows if Jerry would have kept him around? He probably would have just let him walk in free agency or traded him once he was getting close to his payday. Again, does this sound familiar? And again, this franchise is in the state of decay and the state of rotting because of being loyal to the wrong people. These are so many parallels. And also, Sammy going to the North Side is another example of the self-inflicted wounds of the Sox eventually becoming little brother to the Cubs. And I know some of you may not like it, but the Sox are right now little brother to the Cubs, and a lot of it is self-inflicted. Like you trade away Sammy Sosa, who then goes on to become an icon with the help of mistakes. But Sammy drew a lot of young fans to the Cubs. I mean, he was a superhero to kids born in the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, who do you think is banging the drum right now for Sammy's inclusion back in Chicago? Yes, he might be part of the Cubs Hall of Fame, but who's always been driving that? Hey, we got to bring Sammy back. We need a Sammy Sosa day. Bring back Sammy. It's those Cubs fans who are in their late 20s, early 30s, mid 30s, hoping to see their hero again, even though people of a certain age, like me, who was like, wait a minute, he was real thin with the White Sox. He was known as a base stealer. I remember my dad being obsessed, like, oh, he's got a cannon arm. Love that arm. Like, he was supposed to be a 30-30 guy, and he became huge to the point where it's like, is that really free weights? Sammy using free weights like he claimed? And there's also people of a certain age that will never forgive the mistake makers. For the record, I think the only people who actually truly have a right to still be upset with the performance-enhancing use during the steroid era are the guys that were clean. The guys that lost the roster spots or may not have gotten the accolades because they stayed clean. Like Frank Thomas, give him the 2001 MVP. He deserves that. Giambi stole that from him. And he basically admitted it. Those are the guys that have the right to be really, really upset because, again, I went and saw my dad had season tickets up until the strike. My dad's not getting his money back. I'm not getting the time back. I enjoyed that. And yeah, maybe we were all naive, but we can't go back in time and be like, oh, I've never, it happened. Okay. And technically, yes, it was cheating only in that, yes, you were enhancing, but steroids weren't banned. You got to remember that. That's one of the reasons why the players were taking it. They were not being drug tested. It wasn't technically a banned substance in Major League Baseball. It was obviously illegal, but it wasn't banned by baseball. It wasn't like the NFL that banned steroids. Okay, so technically they just enhance their performance. And then when it comes to the hitters, I've always said that you still got to make contact with the ball. And with pitchers, you still got to command the ball. The only thing that performance-enhancing drugs during the steroid era did was it allowed those hitters that did make contact to hit it a lot farther. And those pitchers to throw it a lot harder. Now, the Hall of Fame cases, again, it's a museum. And basically, if you're a Hall of Famer, it adds value to your autograph. They can charge more at autograph shows. So there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, to have a separate wing, a separate wing for the PED users in the Hall of Fame, because it's part of the history. Make a wing as they're the best cheaters. And yeah, thanks, Henry, for not coming in to troll. I got to show that. Yes. Henry, I hope the White Sox figure it out someday, and I appreciate you watching. But give a separate wing for the PED users. Then they're the best cheaters of all time. There's nothing wrong with that. You got to explain that part of history, or you could put the caveat, or the quote unquote asterisk as they're able to hit and command the baseball. They just became great because they could hit it farther or throw it harder. Although Barry Bonds, his alleged use, and I gotta say alleged, I want to protect myself legally here because he never tested positive for steroids and he continues to deny it. But it's still well documented in the book Game of Shadows and Love Me, Hate Me, which Love Me, Hate Me, great book. I totally recommend it. But the documentation is he started using it after 1998. So up until 1998, he was still a Hall of Famer. The guy had 400, and had a couple of MVPs. So I'll go on the record for saying that. Barry Bonds does belong in the Hall of Fame, at least pre-1998. So anyways, back to Sosa. His thriving also speaks to, what we're currently seeing. Players leave the South Side and suddenly get better. Former local sports reporter Barry Rosner, he was on 670 The Score on the afternoon show. And you can use your jump to conclusions of what he kind of threw out there. But he basically said, when Sammy got real big, it was once Mark McGwire came to the St. Louis Cardinals, and Mark came in 1997. So if Sammy's still natural, because again, we never know when he was making his mistakes. Maybe he was making his mistakes with the Sox and when he was with the Rangers. Remember, he came over to the Sox in that trade for Harold Baines along with Wilson Alvarez. But either way, let's just say for the sake of argument, he was natural in 1992 through 1996. He thrived once he left the South Side. He hit like 8 home runs, I believe, in 91. He went 30 for 30 in 1993, and he had his first All-Star season in 1995. But again, who knows when he started making his mistakes. But one thing you and I have had to endure this season was watching players get better the moment they got the heck up out of the South Side. And in a way, it kind of started with Sammy. So, it's kind of a wonder with all this decay and rotting and how guys thrive and, how all this stuff comes together that you're kind of wondering, like, man, it's kind of a surprise that the Sox bottomed out this quickly, this long. Like, you would have thought, like, with all these guys that go on to better careers and they leave and the team keeps trading away the talent, they would have reached 121 losses, in 2017 or 2018, which would have been much better because that's when the team was tanking and there weren't the anti-tanking draft rules. Although tanking will always be bad business. And speaking of business, the baseball business, especially Sox business, seems to be bad and lost. And let's discuss that next on Locked On White Sox. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you are paying for twice? Come to think of it, I need to check them out, as I'm sure I've got some subscriptions out there that I don't need anymore or probably forgot about. And I hear it's like having a personal assistant for your finances. So Rocket Money is your personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending bills, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Okay. Now, I definitely have to check out Rocket Money if I can find those types of savings, especially with the Christmas bills coming due. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockdown today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockdown. rocketmoney.com/lockdown. The World Series, Super Bowl, the Olympics, these world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing, teamwork, and teamwork can also protect your financial legacy and your family's future. SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents are the perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can find you the right policy to keep your financial legacy safely in your family's end zone. SelectQuote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, helping over 2 million customers find over $700 billion in coverage since 1985. Other life insurance brokers offer impersonal, one-size-fits-all policies that may cost you more and cover you less, while SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents work for you to tailor a life insurance policy for your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. If you're in good health, they work with carriers that get you same-day coverage for up to $5 million, no medical exam required. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockdown. Go to selectquote.com/lockdown today to get started. That's selectquote.com/lockdown. SelectQuote, they shop and you save. And welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Special Friday Night Live edition of Locked On White Sox. Basically decided to go live because tried to record this episode a few times. Normally I'm going to post on the mornings, obviously, but it snowed where I lived, so I was spending all morning shoveling my driveway. Had to shovel my in-laws' driveway. Then I obviously had to go to my 9 to 5. That kind of backed me up there. Then I tried to record the episode, and I was just going to post it. And I realized I had a typo in the graphic that I realized probably shouldn't have on there. So, I was just like, screw it. I'm going to go live. It's Friday night. Hopefully you're out actually, having a good time. But and you can check this out obviously later. And it's obviously via, available via Apple or Spotify. And again, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me, as this is the only podcast dedicated to White Sox talk 5 days a week, year-round. And shout out to 670 The Score afternoon host Lawrence Holmes for being the muse of this next segment. It was sort of a quick throwaway observation by Holmes about how fans and organizations are lately getting hung up on the business of baseball and maybe getting it wrong. And that then when I was thinking about it, I'm like, you're right. Baseball's kind of lost its way in terms of the business. Because the business of baseball lately feels like it has come down to, did you sign a player for like too much money or too many years? Like, I mean, people were losing their mind about Max Fried getting 8 years and 200 and some odd $1 million. And I sat down, and it'll be on Monday's show. I sat down with Adam Weinrib of Fansided, of the Baseball Insiders podcast of Fansided. He's basically my boss at SouthsideShowdown.com. He writes for the Yankees Fansided site. He was saying, oh, yeah, of course the Yankees can give him 8 million or 8 years. There's nothing wrong with it, because they can just pay him to go away if it turns sour after like 5 or 6 years. They'll just go about their lives. It's like the Dodgers and the Mets. Everybody's getting hung up. Oh, you gave a 31-year-old pitcher 8 years. Yeah, they're trying to win. And that's what the business of baseball should be doing. And that's what the focus should get back to. Winning, being competitive. Not, hey, let's win on the margins. That type of stuff. Thank you, Henry. Appreciate you. For those that'll be listening on the podcast, again, I'm doing a live episode, and this guy, Henry, has come out saying that I'm going to bat for a team like this, and I respect that. That takes resilience. Have a good day, man. You too. Came in here thinking he was going to troll, and I won his respect. It's the thing. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans, friends, or your baseball fans, friends. Because as you're saying, I'm talking about baseball now. Not just about the Sox, which I'll relate to in a second, but just baseball in general. It feels like, again, the business has to be, you got to win on the margins. And I understand if you're Milwaukee and Cleveland. One second. Didn't want to cough in anybody's ear there. But, it should be about, let's be competitive and let's be interesting. Let's be entertaining. And in the Sox case, they were trying to operate back in 2005, and then they tried to win on the margins, and they didn't do a good enough job to the point where the team was just historically awful, and now they're not even interesting. And even baseball in general, this being good on the margins, and we got to get young talent in here because it's cheap. And we small market teams saying, well, we can't compete financially with these big market teams because they have all the money and blah, 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 blah. Get back to the business of winning, because you're becoming uninteresting. When you focus too much in the margins, you start to feel teams where it's like, who is this guy? Or it's just not fun to watch anymore. In some cases, I still love it, but I can see other people being like, wait a minute, you're valuing this guy because he has, a WR, he's got a decent on base, but he can't really hit for power, and he doesn't do anything else special. Well, yeah, you got to do that. You got, we got to do all these things, and the formula says, and it's like, wait a minute, you're letting a formula. And again, I got no problem with data and analytics. I'm not here to be a get off my lawn guy. People that, every day have heard me, I love data and analytics. It's just the business of baseball should be, you want to feel competitive and interesting teams. Like, that's what the Dodgers and the Mets do. And for example, the Sox, they have become so disinteresting with the fact that they're not fielding competitive teams, that they're not focusing on being good, that a large swath of the fan base has become so angry, so frustrated, and so apathetic that they've completely checked out, to the point where media companies are just stop covering the Sox to begin with. Or they're cutting their coverage way down. Way down. I mean, it's no longer the national pastime. Hot take, but it's not. Football is blown way past baseball. Now, obviously, for example, the Sox have still not reached LA Clippers when Donald Sterling was owning them. That was complete lack of interest and complete lack of coverage. True story. Once covered a Clippers and a Bucks game for the Associated Press. Clippers were so bad and so uninteresting, none of the LA papers sent a beat writer. None of them. I was the beat writer. I was the only reporter covering the Clippers that night, and I was the stringer. And a little inside baseball for you. A stringer basically helps out. And I have written for the Associated Press, just so you know, for my credentials in the past. But the stringer is responsible for helping the writer by going into basically the losing team's locker room and getting quotes because you're supposed to write an unbiased game story. And then you are supposed to write like kind of an out of town story sometimes. And it was just me. And the reason why that's a big deal is usually an AP stringer, you follow around the beat reporters because they're really the ones that are going to guide it because they got to write the quote and that type of stuff. But it was me and their RSN TV sideline reporter in that locker room after the game. That was it. And I think some Bucks.com beat some interns. That's how uninteresting they were. But the Sox become so uninteresting because they focus so much on the cheapness. That's the other thing, with the business of baseball. This focus on, we got to basically try to maximize our profits at the sacrifice of competing. That's what's happening with the White Sox. That's why the business of baseball has just been getting so bad to the point now where it's like, who wants to consume this product? The Sox get coverage, but we've seen the Athletic. They just got rid of, they decided to no longer cover the Sox. They got rid of James Fegan what was it, last year? And now we just saw another media company, cut back on its Sox coverage. Shout out to Herb Lawrence and Vinny Duber, friends of the show. Hope that, they land on their feet. And also Sean Anderson. I hope you guys are still supporting him too. And he's a friend of the show, and he comes on the show when he gets a chance. And he's a former host of the show, and Herb is going to hopefully get on the show as soon as he can in terms of joining me as a guest. I reached out to him, and I'm hoping to get Vinny on the show at some point. I hope he lands on his feet too. But that's an example right now of the business of baseball being bad, that you've got these teams that are like, we got to look at the bottom line, and the bottom line should be, you should be competitive. You should be winning, and you should have interesting players. And if Luis Robert Jr. gets traded or hurt again next season, there might not be any players worth paying attention to. Right now the Sox get some attention because they just traded Garrett Crochet. They were historically awful, but if they just are a random, your run-of-the-mill 100-loss, 90-loss team, who's paying attention to them? I'm still here, obviously, because I like to watch train wrecks, apparently. And I still have this emotional attachment to the Sox. And I still think things obviously can get better at some point. Now, some could say, well, we can fix this by putting in a salary cap, and that could work. Or maybe it's better marketing that could help. But you know what? I don't really think baseball needs a salary cap. You know what's needed? Get more Mark Walters and Steve Cohen in baseball instead. Get those, wealthy owners who understand the business of baseball is winning. If you get more owners of those guys that understand that you try to field the most competitive team that you possibly can, that's going to give you a shot to, not only get to October, but win in October, where, like, for example, the Orioles right now, I think the Orioles are just convinced, hey, October is random. Let's just get to October, see what happens. Let's get more Mark Walters and Steve Cohens. Although the Orioles did get a new owner, so maybe he's just like, you know what? I'll let Elias do what he wants, but if we lose again, I'll pull off a big move. And that's why I can't wait for Justin and Matt Ishba to get into baseball. Even if it is with the Twins that I discussed earlier this week. I mean, think about it. Matt just announced his slashing of concession prices because if you take care of the fans, they will take care of him making money. That's the thing. Start taking care of the fans, whether it's accessing the game on television or at the park. Make the players your business partner and not your enemy, like how the NBA is. I mean, look at what the NBA is doing. They're thriving because they've made the players their business partner. Or another way to maybe get, the business of baseball back into where it needs to be is have an empowered commissioner whose salary is paid by the players union and the owners. That way you have an impartial third party that is in the best interest, that's looking out for the best interest of baseball. And then maybe they can walk into organizations like the Sox and be like, you got to be run better. Or we're forcing you to, sell. You want to make baseball fun again? Make the business of baseball being about good again. Well, Sammy Sosa staying on the South Side will always be a great what-if in franchise history. Let's discuss the other what-ifs in recent history on today's Top 5 Friday after the break. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and I always maintain FanDuel spreads. Over, under, and money lines are fun to play, and if you want to win big or at least double your money, FanDuel's parlays, props, and futures is the way to go. Right now, FanDuel has it at plus 350 for the first scoring play of Detroit and Chicago on this Sunday, being a Detroit field goal. If that hits and you put $10 on it, $35 won. Chicago's at plus 410 for them scoring first and it being a field goal, and $10 on that could hit, could pay out $41. Chicago scoring first and it being a TD is plus 320. You can start with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Again, welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox or wherever they get their podcasts. This show is available on all major podcast platforms. So to quick circle back to the Sammy Sosa discussion in the first segment, I wonder how Frank Thomas would have handled Sammy becoming bigger than him physically and socially, especially since Frank was so anti-doping. That's always going to be a great what if to me. And anyways, today's Top 5 Friday does go over the most recent what ifs in franchise history recently, because I would probably, I can't go back to obviously the 50s, the 40s, the 60s, the 70s. I wasn't alive then. And my dad only told me so many stories. And obviously I'm going to miss some. So feel free to leave some in the comments about if I miss on this here's just what I think are some of the top 5 recent what ifs, going back like 30 years. What if the Sox do hire AJ Hinch over Tony La Russa? Are we basically in this heck hole state that we are right now? Because nothing great has happened since Tony La Russa has cursed this organization. Yes, there was the 2021 AL Central division title, but come on. A monkey could have managed that team to a division championship. My daughter could have managed that team. It was so stacked with talent and it was clicking on all cylinders until they put it on cruise control. And then everybody realized the flaws, that they're not very good defensively and they don't run the bases very well. And then they got absolutely exposed and whipped by the Houston Astros. Phil by the Lake really quick interrupted. Roki sign yet? No, not that I have not seen. And again, if he signs with the White Sox, that would be one of the greatest things to ever happen in franchise history. It would. That'll be a great what if he doesn't sign with the White Sox. What if the Sox did sign Roki Sasaki? That would be amazing. And how would that help them going forward? That type of thing. But getting back to the what ifs, I think AJ Hinch would have obviously helped the Sox obviously avoid losing 121 games. I do think the White Sox would eventually have decayed under him, not because of him though, but because of Jerry would have let these guys walk in free agency. He wouldn't have paid a lot of these guys that were coming due for free agency. I don't see them extending Tim Anderson, even if he wasn't hurt, which I'll get to in a second. I don't see Dylan Cease getting an extension. I don't see Garrett Crochet getting an extension. Well, they didn't. And that's why they're not here anymore. But I don't see Lucas Giolito getting extended. They had no interest in extending Lucas Giolito in 2023. So I just see the talent, the window slowly decaying, but I think in 2022, they may have made the playoffs just because AJ Hinch was obviously an above replacement level manager, where Tony's return only, he was a negative replacement manager, level replacement manager. Tony La Russa, the Hall of Famer. Yeah, he was, I'll give Tony his due. He won World Series. He was an amazing manager, but the game had changed and he didn't change with it. He admitted he didn't even know the rules. The ghost runner. You did not get the Hall of Fame manager of Tony La Russa. What you got was the fun police manager of Tony La Russa, who sucked the air out of that clubhouse. So I think they obviously would have thrived with AJ Hinch. I don't know if they win a World Series. I do think 2024 is probably the 81-81 season that we saw in 2022. Well, how about Garrett Crochet? If he doesn't get hurt in Game 3 of that wild card series in 2020 against the A's, is Ricky fired? Does Ricky Renteria get canned? I think so, yes. I think because the goal was to get AJ Hinch. I think that's the whole reason why they fired him. Rick Hahn was zeroing in on AJ Hinch. The suspension was up. They were going to go get AJ Hinch. And then Jerry hijacked it. Tim Anderson, if he stays healthy and doesn't have those off-the-field personal issues, those family issues, is he still the face of the franchise? Is he still productive? Is he still great? Because, he was changed the game. He was swag. He was when the team was interesting. Obviously, I think he would be gone because, the 2024 was technically the last year of club control, and I don't see I don't see Jerry paying him. How about if the Sox bring back Frank Thomas and keep Aaron Rowand in 2006 instead of trading for Tomei and letting Frank walk? Do they repeat? Well, Frank, the reason why I just bring that what if is Frank hit 39 home runs in 2006 to help Oakland get to the playoffs. And would have been better to have two good players on a Hall of Famer rather than one. I don't think so because Rowand only played in 109 games in 2006, and the Detroit Tigers and the Minnesota Twins were both just on incredible heaters. And Tomei did hit 42 home runs. So obviously you got 3 more home runs, and I think Tomei hit 284, and I think Frank hit like 270 in 2006. And plus, those starting pitchers just ran out of gas. For what those starting rotation did in 2005, they were just gassed for most of the year. It was hard for them to maintain. And the Detroit Tigers and the Minnesota Twins were just on such incredible heaters that 90 wins, and the Sox did win 90 games in 2006, was just not enough to make the playoffs, even though in today's day and age, that clearly makes the playoffs, and you win a division usually with winning 90 games. And then the white flag trade of 1997, if that never happens, do the Sox catch Cleveland? Not likely because of their fielding issues, and Cleveland was just so stacked in 97. That's why Jerry saying them catching Cleveland was crazy. He probably should have picked his words a lot better. Like to say, hey, Cleveland is just really talented. It's unlikely that we're going to catch them. I don't know if we're going to make the playoffs. And I don't know if I can risk losing Wilson Alvarez and Roberto Hernandez for nothing. Boom. We were still going to hate it, but in the long run, that was one of the few times Jerry turned out to be right because the kids could play and they won the division in 2000. And then in 2005, they eventually won the World Series. But again, as I said in the first segment, all the great players just kept leaving, kept just being allowed to walk away. Most of them for nothing. Remember, Paul Konerko is the only one that really got to retire with the Sox during the heyday of the 90s and 2000s and even the early 2010s. And no wonder why the Sox have decayed now into this rotting carcass of a franchise. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox one of your first listens normally. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'll be back on Monday to discuss the Sox projected win total that is starting to come out as I decided to tackle Sammy Sosa's ties to the Sox. So I was going to tackle that. Obviously, today I'm going to push that to Monday. And I talked with the host of Fansided's Baseball Insiders podcast, Adam Weinrub, about if it's actually more painful to be a Yankees fan over a Sox fan. You're going to like that conversation. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding Sammy Sosa leaving the Sox, drawing parallels to the poor state of the White Sox right now, the business of baseball getting lost, and the 5 most recent what-ifs on today's Top 5 Friday. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at ToddJDub, or at Locked On Sox. Or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great weekend. Have a great day. And I will see you Monday.